and welcome back to The Art of Conversation, a radio show dedicated to a college course dedicated to the art of conversation. This program is brought to you by the Eileen G. Jones Honors College and the Department of Communication Studies, Media, and Journalism at Commonwealth University, Bloomsburg. I'm your host, Eric C. Miller, Professor of Communication Studies. Each semester, I teach a class available in your course catalog as Honors 211, The Art of Conversation, that focuses on the ancient art of dialectic, that is, the collaborative process by which knowledgeable peers pursue the truth through focused question and answer. After a few weeks of wading through the theory on these matters, our students spend about 10 weeks in practice, holding twice weekly 75-minute deep dives into topics and questions of their choosing. Our theme this semester is the state of the earth and the good life upon it, granting students considerable leeway in their choice of content. Every week, twice a week, we're talking about how to live better lives on this planet. My guests today are Nathan and Mason, a pair of student moderators who this week asked our class to think a bit about the standard American diet and its effects on our health. Nathan, Mason, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to get into your material here in just a second, but as is customary on this program, I like to learn a little bit about our guests. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your majors, your career ambitions, how you feel about this course, etc.
I'm Mason. I'm majoring in finance. I'm not really sure where I want to go with that yet, but I'm open to network and talk to new people and see where I end up. And with the class, I really enjoy the class. It allows us to kind of really take a look at different perspectives from every single person in the class, and it really allows us to talk about different topics that I may not have ever thought of talking about before.
My name's Nate. I'm also in finance, and as far as the class goes, it's definitely helped me out. As far as conversing is, just last week we led an hour-long conversation, which I've never done before. I also find it very beneficial how, like Mason said, everyone is kind of able to have their own perspectives, and everyone can really understand each other on a deeper level.
So in this class, we tend to build our conversations around some kind of a discussion question that we try to resolve over the course of an hour or 75 minutes. What is your question for the class this week?
We're just kind of digging into the recent rise in obesity and chronic illness in America and kind of figure out what could be the cause and what are some possible solutions to this issue.
Okay, so why is it that the United States has a problem with obesity and related chronic illnesses? To ask that question is to get immediately into the more basic matter of whether obesity is a systemic problem in the United States or whether it is a personal responsibility issue, as they say. And the material you gave us to think about in preparation for this conversation kind of sets the stage for that pretty explicitly. So maybe that's a good place to start. Do you think this is a systemic problem or a personal responsibility issue?
It's kind of tough to really pinpoint exactly where it could be, because if you compare our foods that we have in our country compared to other countries and different regulations, we are a lot less strict, and we do kind of promote certain foods and certain eating habits that aren't necessarily the most healthy for everybody. But it's also, there is a personal responsibility where you can just choose not to eat like that. You can choose to eat healthy. I think it's kind of, that's where the big debate is. It's hard to really pinpoint exactly where the blame should be, but I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. At the end of the day, it really is the person's choice, how healthy they want to be. But having a government that allows these poisons in our supermarkets and stores is only going to help aid in the obesity and chronic illness epidemic.
To call these food items poisons is pretty intense. Can you give us a sense of the nature of the problem? I mean, how sweeping is it? How bad is it? What has brought this issue to your attention?
The problem's huge. How many foods do you see in the supermarket with processed sugars, artificial dyes, heavy metals? And I believe the percentage of obesity in America right now is around 50%, which is a huge rise from what it was previously. Since 1970, it just keeps growing, the problem. So we really need to get people in the positions of power to help solve this problem, or we really have to figure out the root cause before it gets much worse.
If you take a look at certain banned foods and banned substances in other countries, if we look at the European Union, for example, There's additives that we have in our American food that appear in almost everything that we eat, and they're not allowed. These certain things are not allowed in Europe. And if you just take a look at certain basic food, like here, our food's just plagued with red 40 and different artificial dyes that they're carcinogens. Like, we know that they are. I don't know why that we're not doing anything about this. I feel like just because a food looks more pretty to the eye, it doesn't mean that it's okay. Like, we should not allow these certain things here.
I think one of the reasons why those things are allowed is that the food industry wants them to be legal. And the food industry is very influential in Washington, D.C. But one of the other things that they will argue, I think, is that the consumer gets to make a choice when, we walk down the aisle of the grocery store or go into a restaurant or something. We don't have to buy the item with the red 40 dye in it. We might choose to, but that they're going to leave up to us. And so I wonder how you respond to that. Do you think that the physical health of American citizens is a private concern to those citizens, or is it one of these elements of the public good that would inspire the federal government to get involved and try and regulate it?
I honestly think it's a public issue because when you really look into it, obesity, you have to pay all your taxpayer money to help support these things, higher medical bills. As you said, diabetes, you need to pay for. It puts a huge price burden on the American people. And I think it raises the taxes overall. And I think the corporations are just trying to make the biggest profit margin they could possibly get.
It's a lot of accommodation that we all have to make to supply these people. On top of that, if you take a look at where people are spending their money in the medical field, like if you're a patient going into the hospital, obesity is like one of the top 3 incomes for a hospital. So that is kind of more of a private aspect, but it fuels capitalism.
Okay, so on an individual level, my personal health might be a private interest just to me. But when you have a nationwide shift in terms of personal health, the way that we have seen and that you're describing, then it becomes perhaps a matter of public interest. So at that point, what role does the government play in food regulation? What does the government currently do? What has it done? What is it not doing that it should be doing in order to try and protect its citizens from these malign foods and their ingredients?
Well, right now we have the FDA that kind of controls all the food in America. And whether they do a good job or not is really up to opinion of the people. Personally, I don't think they do as good as they should. As far as removing the poisons go, I believe they let money talk more than it should. And they let these corporations kind of buy out what's good for America. They kind of let these corporations take over and have more power than they should, and they let these poisons and all these terrible things go unchecked.
I think it's kind of hard to pinpoint an exact policy that they should do because there's so many different hands that are controlling everything. It is tough, and I'm not necessarily the most qualified individual to give my opinion on these type of things, but I do believe there's something that should be done.
Do you think, you kind of suggested a moment ago that there are some additives that just should be banned, like certain dyes or preservatives or things like that. And that certainly is one way of regulating the food industry. Is it just a matter of banning things, though? Are there certain levels of things that need to be controlled or regulated? Can the government incentivize good behavior among these food companies by rewarding them for making healthier food items or something like that?
Well, it's hard to say because ultimately, if they were to incentivize certain things, that's more of an expense that the government has to cover, right? So that would most likely increase taxes for the everyday person.
I don't necessarily think there should be an incentive to promoting healthier food. I just think there should be a punishment to promoting unhealthy food, because then that way you don't have to pay a large cost to incentivize those behaviors.
Well, there's probably a number of different examples we could consider, but the one that jumped immediately to my mind when we started covering this in class was the one of Michael Bloomberg in New York City a few years ago that nobody seemed to remember but me. But when it happened, it was kind of a big deal. New York City tried to limit the size of soft drinks that you could sell in restaurants or in convenience stores and things like that. And it was because there was this arms race going on for who could create the biggest soda. You know, there was like the big gulp at 7-Eleven or whatever, and it was like a 32 ounce or a 40 ounce drink. And then these gas stations were selling these like ridiculous cups that were like 60 plus ounces of soda. And it was just kind of ridiculous, especially since those really sugary sodas are pound for pound the worst things you can consume in terms of their ratio of nutrient to sugar. But anyway, New York City, under the direction of Mayor Michael Bloomberg, tried to cap the size of soft drinks. And there was this huge public outcry because people didn't really buy into the theory of the move. They just said, who is Michael Bloomberg to try and tell me how big of a soda I can order? You know, this is the nanny state in action, trying to control my behavior, trying to dictate something to me that's just a matter of my own personal interest and maintenance. And I think a lot of people tend to think of health in this way. We have a related conversation about healthcare and healthcare costs, and I think you guys have already started drawing the connections between. On a big enough scale, the way that private citizens live their lives ends up creating a public cost later on when they have to pay the health consequences. But I think that remains kind of the question. Where is the line at which government regulation of what we can eat and drink becomes necessary? But up until you reach that point, people tend to treat it as like an unnecessary imposition. Do you have any thoughts on where that line might be?
It's American culture to want to gorge yourself, right? Our portion sizes in this country are out of control. The big gulp, like it's a massive cup. Nobody needs that. You don't need that big of a drink. But it's almost like the whole American idea of you can have however much you want, whenever you want. It almost goes deeper than people wanting to take action, the government having to do certain things. It's more of a societal thing. It's not necessarily the specific person or the government itself. I don't know where it started, but people have a certain view on their food where they just think they can just eat these certain things, and it is what it is. There's no consequences.
I think you really need to look at what the laws are and how they really affect you. You can paint it as it's taking away your freedoms, but at the end of the day, you don't need a 40-ounce soda drink. Like that benefits no one. No one on earth is going to be benefited by that. And while it's nice to have novelties at scale, you really need to look at these policies for what they are and see the pros and cons and look more into it than just they're taking away my freedoms.
Someone brought up the example of the Morgan Spurlock documentary, Super Size Me. Have you ever seen this?
I've heard a lot of things about it, but I've never personally watched the whole thing.
It's kind of old at this point. It's probably like 20 years old. And he died a year or two ago, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if it was because of his lifestyle during making the documentary, but as I recall, the method was he would go to McDonald's every day, 3 times a day, and if they ever asked him to supersize his order, he would do it. And as he did this, he was going to the doctor regularly and getting health checkups to see how an all McDonald's diet impacted his health. And of course, you can see the movie to see the results, but he suggested that it wasn't good, that his body was deteriorating pretty quickly. And of course, maybe McDonald's is an easy target, but as we kind of learned in the course of our discussion, it's certainly not alone. We're talking about restaurants here and portion sizes and ingredients, but we're also talking about grocery stores and convenience stores and any place where you can go and buy food. We are just so overwhelmed with the appearance of a million options, but they're all like fructose based, or they're all just like sugary, unhealthy options. They're packaged in very glitzy packaging. They're difficult to avoid. It's like a ubiquitous food environment around us. That makes an interesting contribution to the core question. Can you choose to live a healthy lifestyle when you are just surrounded all the time by unhealthy food options and advertising for those food options? I mean, what do you think?
I think it's very difficult and it's very expensive. I mean, you can't do that affordably. Like the average person really just cannot afford to do that. At the end of the day, the food industry it's a for-profit industry, so they're going to take shortcuts where they can to maximize profits. Not only are they maximizing profits, they're taking control of your mind a little bit. If you go to get a bag of chips, you don't just eat one chip. You can't. It takes a lot of self-control to eat one chip. You want to eat the whole bag. I mean, that's what happens. It kind of sucks you in. Like you kind of find a trigger food. That's what sets it off in your mind.
This stuff is completely covered all over the stores. It's almost impossible to avoid. And even if you get some of the healthier alternatives, they still have things like seed oils in them. And I really think that living a healthy life becomes much harder when the true healthy options are so few and far between.
But you've described it also as kind of a cultural phenomenon. In the United States, you are free, so we get to eat whatever we want, and we can eat as much of it as we want and drink as much of it as we want. And so there's this sort of built-in cultural push to excess. So we've got like the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, where you go to this steakhouse, and if you eat their 72-ounce steak, you can get it for free. Or if you eat like this giant pile of ice cream, we'll put your picture on the wall. I feel like what you're describing here in terms of obesity rates and diabetes and heart disease and other sorts of related illnesses, it's kind of just the cost of doing business in this way. We have become kind of like a decadent, hedonistic sort of culture, and eventually you got to pay the price. The bill comes due, and it seems like that's happening here. What bothers me more so than this stuff, although this stuff does bother me, is the way that it is marketed to us from the time that we are very young. And we talked about this a little bit in class too, how these companies set out from infancy practically to create brand loyalty in children, to advertise to them, to put commercials on during the cartoons when kids can't tell the difference, frankly, between the show they're watching and, Tony the Tiger or whatever mascot for a cereal. That to me seems really fundamentally unethical. What's your take on advertising to children for these types of foods?
I just think it's truly criminal. They're gaining lifelong customers by doing this, and in turn, they're also gaining lifelong patients, people who will be visiting the doctors more than the average Joe because they're going to have diabetes type 2, any other chronic illnesses, heart disease at a higher rate, all-cause mortality at a higher rate because they're eating these unhealthy processed foods for their whole lives.
I agree 100%. I think you covered it very well. When you're showing these bright colors and these fun things to these kids and you're associating it with food, it just builds onto the food culture of, I need to eat to be happy. Like even if you take a look at, like when you're younger, like you're playing t-ball, you're playing softball, sports like that, you win, you lose, like it doesn't matter. You go get ice cream after, right? So you're associating food as a positive experience, which I think is understandable. It's okay, but I think it gets taken too far. Like you said, you have the food eating contests and stuff like that, where you're being rewarded by eating this copious amounts of food. Like that's looked at as a good thing, but it's only looked at as a good thing here. It's not a thing to be proud about anywhere else in the world, but here it is.
Well, I know in the past couple decades too, there's been a discussion about how food is used to reward kids for achievement in school. When I was a kid, I don't know if they still do this. They had this like reading competition every year where you read a bunch of books and you get a gift card to Pizza Hut, so you get like a pizza. Or your teachers would have like pizza parties for you in the classroom if like everyone did well on the test or something like that. And so there's just so many ways from when you're very little on in which unhealthy food items are offered as a reward for good behavior. The other thing about a lot of these food items, especially the ones that are really sugary, is that they have essentially like addictive properties, which I think is worth noting. We're talking here a little bit about big food in the same sort of language as we talk about, big tobacco or big pharma or big oil, other large industries that make lots and lots of money pushing products that are ultimately unhealthy for their customers. How should we think about these companies that sell really sugary cereals or French fries and chicken nuggets and other sorts of unhealthy foods to children?
Well, not only are these foods addictive, but due to the fact that they're so heavily processed, it doesn't even register with your body, and the ghrelin hormone in your stomach, which reads back to your brain, which is your hunger hormone, it does not work correctly when you're eating these foods as it would with real food. Overall, these foods keep you coming, and you have no sense of when to stop.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that, these foods, there's no nutritional value. Your body's not really getting anything that it needs. You're not filling yourself up. Like there's no satiation from it.
That's weird. Like that's almost the exact language that Morgan Spurlock used in the movie. How like at some point he knew like his health was deteriorating, but if anything he wanted it more because he had developed this like association with it or addiction to it. I don't know, but he couldn't wait to get back and get more and more just to fill this kind of like void That movie came out a few years after one of my favorite books on this subject, which is Fast Food Nation. I recommend it in class. Have either of you read it? Eric Schlosser came out in 2000. They made a movie out of it eventually. It wasn't a great movie, but the book is just one of my all-time favorites because of the way that it documents how the fast food industry in particular, along with the expansion of the interstate highway system and car culture, contributed to just changing the entire landscape of the United States in the second half of the 20th century. And along the way, he talks about a lot of these same issues. Advertising to children. I recall one part in the book where he notes that there was a time when a bunch of the major or maybe one of the major soft drink companies, Coca-Cola, I think, released a whole line of branded baby bottles, suggesting apparently to mothers that they should be giving their infant children Coke and Sprite. The whole thing about not just McDonald's, but Burger King and these other places having kids clubs and Happy Meals with toys in them and a whole cast of animated characters who are like your friends. They want you to come in so they can sell you this food that's really profoundly unhealthy for them. Eventually, I think you see these things starting to get tied together into a larger and more concerning sort of culture. Is that where we arrived eventually in class, that whether this is a systemic issue or a private interest issue or a mix of the two, that it is a commentary in some way on American culture more broadly? Does that bigger question have an answer for you?
I think the main reason why our culture is this way is because of marketing and because of advertising. No matter where you go, you see some sort of big picture, some sort of something catching your eye that's directed towards a product of some sorts that you really shouldn't be having. That's been drilled into our minds for so long that it just kind of become part of our everyday life. Like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, it's just like an American product, just an American thing at this point because it's been so drilled into everybody's mind.
America always has been the place of like rags to riches and the American dream. Everyone comes here to make money, and that's just really what these corporations are exactly doing. They're just here to make money. They're not interested in our health. But on top of that, the American lifestyle, the freedom that I can do whatever I want, when I want, as much as I want, that paired with the government's carelessness for these horrible foods creates a really, really dangerous environment.
I think that is kind of an overarching theme of this course anyway. Sooner or later, we always end up back at capitalism and marketing and advertising, the drive to turn a profit first and foremost, regardless of whether or not it's healthy or beneficial or even in any way good for the general public. And the increased urgency for all citizens to constantly be on their guard against what these companies are trying to do to them in one venue or another, or the different ways they're trying to get your money or lure your children, etc., etc. In any case, you have been listening to the Art of Conversation Radio. I am joined today by Nathan and Mason, and we're talking about the great American diet, obesity, health impacts, etc. We'll be back after these words. Hello and welcome back to the Art of Conversation Radio. I am your host, Eric C. Miller, and I'm here today with Nathan and Mason, and we're talking about food. Now, in order to launch this conversation, we had initially grounded it, I think, in some personal experiences with food and with diet and with physical fitness, and that brings us back to this juncture. So here in the second half of the program, Mason, maybe you can get us started off telling us a little bit about your personal experience.
Yeah, of course. So this topic for me is something that I take very, very, very seriously. When I was younger, I used to be pretty overweight. I mean, I was obese actually, like not even overweight, I was obese. I lived a pretty active, healthy lifestyle for the most part, but I always struggled with binge eating, and it was always foods that I knew I shouldn't have been eating. So when I got older, I kind of had to take control of that because it turns into like an addiction. You crave foods that are just ultra processed, things that you shouldn't have. I don't have much experience with drugs, but I would imagine it's got to be a craving similar to drug. you have a feeling deep down you want to eat.
Was it a genetic thing for you? I mean, did your parents struggle with weight?
Yeah. But they also got it in check as well. But they were overweight when they were younger, and then as they got older, they were able to take more control. So it was definitely a genetic thing. It's kind of a harder factor to fight. You know what I mean? Like, willpower can do certain things, but it does make it a lot harder when you do have the genetics working against you.
So what kind of things did you binge eat?
If I would have like ice cream, right, and I have a tub of ice cream, for me, I couldn't just have a little bit. I would eat the whole thing. Or like get a bag of chips, can't eat a few, I would eat the whole thing. Or like candy, like not a little bit, the whole thing. It's just certain things like that taste a lot better than Whole Foods. Like, right, if you're gonna put a carrot in front of me, you're gonna put a Reese's peanut butter cup in front of me, I'm gonna take the Reese's peanut butter cup.
Yeah, I mean, the sugar and the additives and the chemicals are carefully calibrated to make it taste that way.
Yeah, and they do put a lot of research and a lot of study into the foods that they make. They do calculate what they put into these certain things, and they do set off certain receptors in your brain the same as like a drug would. They hit your dopamine pathway in your reward system very, 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 very heavily.
That's something, and not to keep harping on this book, but that's something that Schlosser talks about in Fast Food Nation. When they did the movie, there is a scene in which, you know, he goes into this laboratory for McDonald's, and they put a blindfold on him, and they're holding these objects up to his nose and asking him if he can identify them. And he can in every case. He's like, oh, those are fries. Yeah, those are nuggets. That's a cheeseburger, blah, blah, blah. And then when they take the blindfold off, the guy in the lab coat isn't holding anything in his hands except a bunch of different test tubes. And he's like, so the burger, you think that smells persuasive? Does it need more hickory smoke or something? Like, no, that's fine. But that's something that you have to bear in mind. And I think it's part of this kind of toxic food environment that we're discussing, is that so many things that we eat don't taste that way because that's the thing itself. They taste that way because they've been carefully calibrated with chemical additives to make it taste that way. And that's also what can make them kind of addicting, because you want more and more and more of that. But as you said before, it doesn't really contribute much to a good nutrient mix.
Yeah, and I mean, when I started to take control over my life and started to really dial everything in, the more you know, it really freaks you out, because like you think, okay, I know what healthy is, I know what healthy is not, until you start learning what healthy is not. And then you kind of realize, like, these certain foods that they're marketed that, oh, they're supposed to be good for you. Like, you can eat like a protein bar, for example, it has protein in it, it's supposed to be good for me. And then you flip it around, you look at the ingredients, you don't know what they are. I couldn't, like, if I just take a regular whey protein bar, you're like, oh, okay, whey protein, this is good for me. I look at the ingredients, I don't know I probably couldn't even tell you what 6 of the ingredients are.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Then what about you, Nathan? Do you have a personal experience with these sort of things?
Similar to Mason, I also was obese at one point. Food was I used it as like a comfort. It's kind of what I looked forward to. I'd go home and I'd be excited for dinner, or every time I went somewhere, I'd be excited to go to a restaurant. It's just kind of my reward system. And like he said, it is like a drug. I mean, it's been proven they can release similar levels of dopamine to drugs. And I kind of got to a point where I was eating just one day, and I had the thought, like, maybe I should put it down. And I was like, I'm already bigger. I might as well just keep eating. It's not going to affect anything. But I really needed something to change that. So what helped me a lot was I joined the wrestling team in 10th grade. And that's definitely one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. It taught me a lot about hard work and consistency, but also that you can get a better feeling than eating it. The feeling after you work out, I think, trumps eating 10 times out of 10. So that kind of got me onto something new, like a new way to feel that up, or like chase something up during my day. I did that 10th, 11th, and my 12th grade year. I did a pretty big cut my senior year, and I remember my coach telling me, he was like, now you know, like, you have what it takes to lose weight. You'll always have the ability to lose weight for the rest of your life. That kind of stuck with me. Like, it's not an impossible feat to lose the weight. It's always in your hands. Sure, the government allowing these foods in, addictive foods, isn't going to help, but at the end of the day, it is your choice. I forget what I was watching or who said it, but I remember hearing environment always beats willpower over time. So you can have all the right intentions, but if you're in the wrong environment around the wrong things, you'll never escape.
I want to ask you about the wrestling piece a little bit, because I've had some friends who are wrestlers, and it sounds to me like in some cases the imperative to make weight before every match can create almost like eating disorder type conditions for wrestlers. Did you find that the press to cut a pound or more before a match was a challenge to you physically or psychologically?
It was 100% a challenge, and there's no doubt that there have been a lot of eating orders that have come from wrestling. Even after my last match my senior year, I remember left the tournament, I had Chick-fil-A, ice cream, all this stuff, but then I sat down and I was like, I feel like crap, Like it's not fulfilling. And after you eat, you always get this, at least for me, I get this sort of clarity. Binge eating to me anymore at this point really just isn't fulfilling. I don't feel good. I'm kind of disgusted with myself. It's definitely just changed my reward system in my brain.
I mean, it's my understanding that weight management has a lot more to do with the calories you take in than like the exercise that you do. But if you're an athlete and you have to constantly be in the gym or working out in preparation for a sport, I'm sure it has some impact. How do you assess the importance of calorie cutting versus calorie burning?
At the end of the day, losing weight is always calories in, calories out, as you said. And for wrestling, as far as that goes, the practices are so hard that it's almost impossible to be in a calorie surplus. When you diet on top of that, the weight's going to come off regardless. It's impossible to wrestle and not lose weight. It would be an impressive feat to gain weight while being in a season of wrestling, I'd say, or doing anything extremely active of that nature. I mean, when you're burning that many calories a day, first of all, it takes away time out of your day to eat. Second of all, I don't know about you, but after I work out, I'm not particularly hungry. Like right after, maybe like an hour or two, I'm hungry, but there's like an additional 4-hour window where you're not going to eat. You don't want to eat before. So I think a combination of those things is what helps lose the weight.
In my experience, it's mostly like a habitual thing because, well, I'm like a bigger person. I'm like 6'3" and I weigh about 220 right now, which is pretty typical. But I have gone as high as like 240 at certain points in my life where I was really careless about this sort of thing. Eventually, like, what year is this? 2024. About 8 years ago, I decided to get very serious about my physical fitness. In part because I read this book, Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma. Are you familiar with it? I just wasn't very well educated about nutrition. I didn't really know that much about foods containing nutrients versus empty calories and how you got to optimize for the one and minimize for the other. And so really I was well into adulthood before I ever thought seriously about eating. Up until then, I had mostly just consumed whatever I wanted, in part because I was very active and I thought it would balance out in the end. And it did when I was younger, but eventually it stopped. And anyway, about 2016, I went through this really rigorous regimen in which I monitored my calories so closely that I ate the exact same things for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day for like 3 months. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but it was like wheat toast and 2 eggs for breakfast, yogurt with granola and fruit for lunch. And then every week I'd go to the grocery store and buy a whole bunch of different vegetables that I would slice up and put in Tupperware and then stir fry each night. No snacks, nothing to drink but water, like really monastic sort of lifestyle. And I was really amazed that I started losing weight like right away, and it continued, and I kept it up to the point that I wasn't even really tempted to eat or drink anything else because I felt like I had achieved something and that would be like I would lose it, And so I kept pushing it until like this was through the summer, and when I came back to the campus in the fall, I bumped into one of my colleagues here across the quad, and he came up to me and he asked me if I was doing okay. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing great. Like, why do you ask? And he's like, you look a little thin. Like, is something going on? And it was really only then that I like processed the fact that I had gone from like 225 pounds to like 185 pounds in the course of like a summer. It gave me maybe some window into the psychology of an eating disorder because I didn't think I had lost that much, and I thought I could keep going. I thought I could press this and see. But it was only when other people were like, you know what, you should stop because you don't look so great anymore. That's when I kind of dialed it back and have since reached some kind of an equilibrium. I think it did benefit me in that now at least I am much more conscientious about food. Like you said, I'm interested now in what's in it for the first time, and I'm going to try to avoid things if I don't look at the ingredients list and I don't know what these like 7 and 8 syllable words mean. At minimum, I think everybody should bring a certain level of thoughtfulness to their dietary choices and recognize that they do have consequences. And then maybe you can broaden out a little bit and look at the companies that are trying to market this stuff to you and ask, in what kind of a country do we allow these powerful corporations to constantly push this content on us, given its effects for our health? So as you look at your personal fitness now, how do you live? Do you have a plan? Do you have a strategy when you choose a menu for your week, or talk about portion size and quantity and things like that? How do you try to manage this stuff?
I definitely prioritize my health, and I do think about the things that I eat, and I do kind of plan out what I'm going to eat, what certain foods. I would say maybe about a year or so ago, maybe a little bit less, I definitely did, like you said, where I ate the same thing almost every single day for so long. It was pretty much like an eating disorder because I didn't realize that at the time, but I was like, I didn't feel that good. I looked good, like I was making good progress, but I just didn't feel that good. But now, the main thing that I stick to is I kind of think to myself before I eat something, would my ancestors have eaten this? Like, is it a natural food? You know what I mean?
I like that.
My ancestors weren't finding Kit Kat bars laying around on the ground. So I try to stick to more whole foods if I can. Like, I try to eat at least a salad a day because I want to get my greens and I want to get the micronutrients that a salad will offer. I try to eat fish at least once, twice a week because I want to get the omega-3. I want to get certain vitamins, red meat, chicken. I want to eat a wide variety of things because every certain food that is a whole food will offer something to you that you should have. So I used to be super strict and trying to eat the same things because I knew it was in them. But I took a step back and I was like, I want to, like, if I want to feel better, I need to have everything. So I don't necessarily try to eat the same thing every day anymore. I just try to eat as much as possible that's within reason.
Do you take vitamins?
No, I actually used to, but I've stopped taking vitamins and I try to eat the vitamins. I rather get the vitamins through actual food rather than just taking a pill, because taking pills like that, it's like a Band-Aid. I'm not actually solving the problem. I'm just pushing it to the side. I'd rather take that situation head on. I'd rather, like, if I want to take omega-3, I'd rather just eat fish. It's much better for you and it's more natural. Again, my ancestors weren't taking omega-3 vitamins. They're just eating fish.
I work out 5 to 6 times a week, and as far as my diet goes, I'd say it's like 85-15. I'm not going to lie and say like it's perfect. I still enjoy those like sweet, like unhealthy foods from time to time, but a majority of the time I am eating the unprocessed whole foods and looking for those options. Or if I eat more one day, I just consciously eat less the next day to just kind of even it out, or vice versa. If I like the past couple of days, I haven't really been eating much. Today I'm trying to eat a little bit more, but I like what you said about how you tracked your calories at one point, because I also was in those same exact shoes, having a very similar diet for a long period of time. And I think when you track your calories, it gives you really, really good insight into how much calories a food contain, like what your maintenance is, and it makes it so much easier to manage. Like, I can look at a lot of food items and predict the amount of calories in them, like within like 200, 100, 200 calories. That's just from looking at all these things, looking at how many calories certain things have. I think it's a lot easier to make conscious decisions about what I'm eating, for sure.
I think it's really important now that the FDA or whatever agency requires them to put calorie counts on the labels for products, I find that so helpful. Even I go to Starbucks like several times a week, and while I'm waiting in line, I'm always looking at all the stuff they have under the glass there. And I almost never order any of it, but I always think about ordering something until I look at the card and it says this has like 450 calories. And I'm just like, I can't spare that today.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I've definitely been in the same situation where, like, I'll look at something, oh man, that sounds good. Oh, 1,300 calories, all right, maybe not.
I have the exact same system in my head. Like, I know roughly what my maintenance is. If I see something that looks good, but it's X amount of calories, like 500 or 400, like you said at Starbucks, I'm like, it's just not worth it. I'd rather eat something that's going to fill me up and satiate me.
You guys are getting to this wisdom much earlier in life than I did, because I didn't think about this at all until adulthood. And I actually, 10 or 15 years ago, if you had told me one of these days you're going to be the kind of person who counts calories. I'd have been like, get out of here. Like, that's not me. I'm not doing that. But now I do it all the time. And in part, I credit it to my wife, because she's very attentive to this sort of thing, very interested in the health quality of everything. And it has been illuminating for me in that it shows me just how bad my diet has been for much of my life. Even little things that I never would have thought about. She, for instance, will not allow me to buy white bread to bring it into the house because it contains enriched flour instead of the 15 grain stuff that she likes to buy. But that's what I always ate when I was a kid. And so I was always like, give me a break. This is fine. This is what I'm used to. And it wasn't even until the last couple of years or so that I actually decided to fact check her on this and look into the type of enriched flour that they use in white bread or that they use in white rice. And she's just right. And that's just one example among many. And I think in that sense, I was a product of this food culture. The stuff that I thought was fine to eat was the stuff that seemed normal to me. It wasn't because I had done a careful deep dive into the ingredients or the health value of any of it. It was just like, this is what I'm used to, so it's fine. And it's that way for a lot, probably many tens of millions of Americans, which is why this has become a public health crisis instead of a private preference. I wanted to ask you, though, too, now that you live on a college campus, and it seems to me like it could be difficult to eat well while going to the commons or going out to eat with your friends on the weekends and stuff. I wonder how that has impacted your commitment to a healthy diet. Is it easy to eat well on a college campus or no?
I'd say it's relatively easy. Obviously, you have a lot of the unhealthy foods, like at the lounge, there's always processed snacks there and fried foods. But at the as far as the dining hall goes, if you want to, you'll always be able to find something healthy. And even if you can't find anything healthy they're serving, they always have hamburgers. You just get a burger, just the straight beef, no bun. You can always do that. There's always options.
I actually find it being here makes it much easier to eat healthy because I don't have to cook anything for myself, right? So anything that I want isn't necessarily at hand, but there's a rotation of certain things, so I kind of get to have different things every day, so it makes it a lot easier for me. I mean, you are faced with the challenge of not wanting to give in to the pizza that's there or something of that nature. I think it does help you build a lot more self-discipline, though. So it kind of almost reinforces the habits that you've built up to this point.
To me, it was kind of the opposite. I thought when I lived alone for 5 years before I got married, and I felt like I had complete control over everything. My refrigerator contained 7 items on any given day, and it's all stuff that I chose. Nothing that I thought would disturb my progress was allowed in the house, and so it was fine. But now I'm married, and my wife is a very good cook, and so she cooks healthy things. But it's a quantity problem for me because sometimes I just don't want to stop. And I also have kids who always want snacks in the house, and I probably get 40% of my calories these days just finishing stuff that they didn't finish at dinner, especially when we go out to eat. So it's when you have other people in your orbit, I think it makes it challenging, or at least you have to give up some of that control. But anyway, I find it encouraging to hear that it's possible to eat well on a college campus. I think if I was a student today, I would probably struggle. I think I did struggle with it at the time because it was what they do at McDonald's where they say, oh, we now have a line of salads or something. But you didn't go to McDonald's because you wanted to get a salad. And so once you're there, that doesn't mean you're miraculously gonna do it. Or they'll let you swap out your French fries for apple sticks or something. But you're not gonna do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you don't find that the higher calorie, less healthy items tempt you away from the good stuff at the Commons?
I don't think so. I mean, everyone knows about the freshman 15, right? So I was obviously conscious about that too coming in, and I wanted to make sure that didn't happen to me, obviously. I'm just really sticking to the same mission. Kind of like what Mason said, it's almost easier here because there always is a healthy option. It's not guaranteed that dinner at my house is always going to be healthier, high in protein or whatnot, but here you can almost always find a higher protein option, which is what I usually get, and I think in that way it's easier.
It definitely is much easier to eat here. That's a given. And I think he did mention the freshman 15, which I think is pretty funny because I was going to mention that as well. I've had certain friends that come here and they just pizza all day, every day. I'm just I know how it feels to not eat well, and it doesn't feel good, right? If I'm eating junk all day, every day, I feel like what I'm eating, I feel like junk. So if I can eat clean, I eat good foods, then that feeling for me outweighs the temporary satisfaction of eating something that's unhealthy.
Nathan, Mason, thank you for joining me on the program today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Once again, this has been an episode of The Art of Conversation Radio, a program brought to you by the Eileen G. Jones Honors College and the Department of Communication Studies, Media, and Journalism at Commonwealth University, Bloomsburg. I am your host, Eric C. Miller, and I look forward to seeing you next time.